and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be covering two stories. The first is with reference to DG ISBR's press conference, where he spoke about a lot of things that have disillusioned a lot of the myths that the PTI has been talking about for a while now. He has clarified a lot of the things that he has spoken about with reference to the political scenario of the country in the past week or so, and has clarified quite a few things with regards to the army as well. He has spoken about a number of things related to the extension of the Chief of Army Staff, which he says he will not be asking for or accepting. He's also spoken about the letter with regards to the conspiracy that was spoken about from the earlier Prime Minister, and said that no such thing actually exists, and that the word conspiracy was not part of the statement that was issued after the NSC meeting. He also clarified that the military institutions have no involvement in politics and have no intention to do so, and that there will be no martial law in the country. A lot of these things, of course, have huge impacts on the way PTI's narrative is going to get affected, but moreover also on the way Pakistan's relationship with the US is going to evolve in the coming days. The US has welcomed the statement from the DG ISBR and has again refuted any claims of any involvement or conspiracy, as well as they have done earlier as well. They've also congratulated the newly elected Prime Minister and have also reiterated the importance and strength of the relationship between US and Pakistan, and said that it is an important relationship for the US as well. We'll talk more on how the DG ISBR's press conference is going to affect the political scenario at the domestic front and also internationally, with particular reference to our relationship with the United States. At the end of the show, we'll also be taking a look at what is going on in occupied Jerusalem at the moment, where we understand that the Israeli forces have raided Al-Aqsa mosque, and there have been a lot of videos that have been circulating, where earlier today before dawn the Israeli occupation forces raided the Al-Aqsa mosque compound, and there were rubber bullets that were also fired. More than 150 Palestinians have been injured, hundreds of them have been detained, and a lot of this is something that we have seen in the past as well. Even last Ramzan, similar things have happened in Al-Aqsa mosque, which of course then resulted to a very long war and a lot of destruction, including the loss of lives. And this time around as well, we've seen that it has begun. But what is the real situation at the moment, and how are we going to look at the future of the Palestinian people and relieve them of their suffering, is what we're going to be talking about at the end of the show as well. For this and more, we have been joined in the studios as always by Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment in the show, I have been joined online by Javed Hussain, who's the former ambassador, and Brigadier retired Rashid Wali Janjua, who's President IPRI. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. Mr. Javed, I'll start with you. One of the most important developments of the DG ISBR's press conference is, of course, the issue of the alleged conspiracy and the involvement of the United States in Pakistan's internal affairs. And the DG ISBR has clarified that the word conspiracy was not used in the statement issued by the NSC, and has also said that no such thing actually exists. What the matter referred to as earlier was undiplomatic language and interference in the internal matters of the country. Can you also help us understand the distinction that is being made at the moment with regards to interference in the internal matters of the country and a conspiracy?
Well, first of all, I think I would like to welcome this statement by DG ISBR, which has clarified many things for the information of the public. Most important, I think, is the point made by him that there was no conspiracy by Pakistani political leadership together with US to overthrow the government of former Prime Minister Imran Khan. There was, of course, a meeting between a senior US State Department official and our ambassador at that time in Washington, D.C., during which that American senior official used inappropriate language which amounted to blatant interference in Pakistan's internal affairs. Now, that was unacceptable, and that is why the National Security Committee decided during its meetings later on, after I think about 3 weeks or so later, when the previous government convened that meeting, to lodge protest with the US both in Washington and in Islamabad over this use of unacceptable language by the senior American official. That was done. but to claim that the use of inappropriate language by the American Syrian official who amounted to a conspiracy is, I think, is totally uncalled for, totally unjustified, because conspiracy would involve that some people are in league with, working with, in league with American agencies to bring about a change of regime in Pakistan, and that matter, as pointed out by GISPR, was investigated by by a very by a Pakistani intelligence agency, and it was found out that there was no truth whatsoever in that allegation or then in that charge. So I think it was very regrettable that the previous government pursued this propaganda line
All
just
right.
to retain
All right,
power.
Brigadier Rashid, this propaganda line is still being used by the PTI as well. Of course, this narrative has been extended to their political rallies as well, and something that has been put forward by the previous prime minister is now being taken to the workers and the people as well for support. And understandably, it's a narrative for the elections. But when we look at the issue of the conspiracy involvement, it's a huge thing to say. And then after the DGISBR has clarified it, the United States has issued a statement as well, and we've seen that a lot of this has been discussed and disregarded. How do you think this is going to impact the narrative that has been put forward by the PTI? Will they be able to continue pursuing the same narrative and calling it a conspiracy?
Well, they may like to continue doing that, and they are doing it for their own political reasons. It's just a reactionary populist rhetoric, and they'll keep doing so. But whether they should have done so or not, as an analyst, I'm very clear that this was a very irresponsible act. I mean, in diplomatic exchanges, proportionality, balance, and circumspection, these are the time-honored traditions. And does anyone for a moment believe that someone like the Assistant Secretary of State of the United States, he would do a kind of a conspiracy by expressing the views very candidly in front of a foreign ambassador? In fact, this was a lunch meeting called by an ambassador in which the views were expressed, and those were sent through what they call non-circulation telegrams, which is a standard cipher cable that shows your own internal assessment. Now, the proportionate, a balanced, and a mature diplomatic reaction was to summon the U.S. Foreign Affairs, and in the Foreign Office, the relevant officials should have Pakistan's concern should have been communicated. Well, later on, a march was issued. But elevating this issue to the level of a national security threat, securitizing it disproportionately, discussing it in the National Security Committee as if all hell has broken loose, I think we went overboard. And such internal communications and letters are not to be waived publicly in a public jalsa. This was not a very mature and a very responsible
All
act,
right.
and that created a narrative, and the brush fire has been lit. The prairie fire is difficult now to extinguish because there are
Right.
highly
Right, Mr. Javed, when we look at the situation with regards to the US, of course, they have issued a statement of how important their relationship with Pakistan is. And they have been issuing statements refuting whatever has been going on or whatever allegations have been made. When we look at our relationship with the United States, of course, it's an important one. But in the aftermath of all of that has happened with regards to the alleged conspiracy from the United States, how is this going to impact our relationship in the long run, and how can the new government pursue the relationship in a way that perhaps the stain of this is washed away soon?
Well, unfortunately, this misuse of this telegram by the previous government has had a negative impact on our relationship with the United States. There cannot be any denying of that reality or that fact. I think it was very inappropriate on the part of the previous government to do what they did. However, having said that, I think we have to move forward, we have to now take steps to sort of iron out these difficulties that may have developed between Pakistan and US in the interest of a mutually beneficial long-term relationship between Pakistan and US. US is an important, I mean, the most important, most powerful country in the world economically and militarily and politically. And our national interests are deeply engaged with that country, and it is in our interest to have friendly relations with the United States. Of course, while doing so, we have to safeguard our national dignity and security. But if there is no conspiracy, as now is quite well established, on the part of the U.S. to do anything actively to interfere in our political affairs, I think we should not be making such allegations, and we should refrain from doing these things that were done in the past. So, looking forward, I think we should recognize that we need to have a mutually beneficial, mutually acceptable, friendly relationship with the United States in terms of political exchanges, in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of discussion.
Brigadier Janjua sir, I just wanted to come towards you asking about, if we look at the track record of the previous government, of course they maintained sort of good relation with the obviously Trump administration, but their problems started with the Biden administration. So can we say that rather than the PTI as a political party, rather than their slogans should be against America, it should be against Biden's foreign policy rather than America itself? And if they go along this kind of narrative, it would be better suited to them?
I think what they are doing is they have just given a blanket treatment to anti-Americanism and using it as a populist rhetoric to ratchet up the tensions. They are not being nuanced enough to parse open the two and the differences between the Trump and Biden. They are not going into that kind of a discourse. Their discourse is very simple, that look, America is interfering and meddling in our internal affairs, and there was a conspiracy, and the people who were involved into vote of low confidence, which is a constitutional and a democratic process. And every constitutionalist and every Democrat should espouse that. But they are negating everything that stands for that. That is a very dangerous thing. And I think as more information comes, this issue is debated in the parliament, in the parliamentary committee for defense, and maybe a judicial commission is also made to lay to rest once and for all that this was not that kind of a conspiracy, and the meddling narrative which is now being
right. And Brigadier Sahab, I want to talk more about the Judicial Commission as well. But Farrukh, I want to also clarify one thing. There is, of course, a malicious campaign that the DGISPR also referred to in his press conference and said that it is being run against the army. But another thing that is being discussed in the aftermath of the press conference is the issue of whether or not interference or conspiracy is one and the same thing, or is it separate? And a lot of that is being used to make the statement by the DGISPR redundant. Is that so?
Yeah, but actually, this is really funny. Remember that if you are going to tell me tomorrow that how to actually conduct my business or how to speak, that amounts to interfering in my matters, right? I can always tell you, Sana, mind your own business. Don't ask me to do what I want to do, right? But a conspiracy is when you actively try to evict me or boot me from the show or block me from the show or do something that amounts to stopping me from doing my job, right? So there has to be a smoking gun. And by the way, a cable that was written to by Pakistan's own ambassador to Pakistan's own foreign office does not amount to that kind of smoking gun. You need some kind of accounts, you need people and contacts where information was provided and a plan was set how to actually carry something, right? That didn't happen. So we can be very clear that there was no conspiracy, and it is very clear from the statement that was put out after the NSC meeting. And now the propaganda bit, let me parse the propaganda or social media campaign that continues. There are three distinct elements to it. One, of course, is the local disgruntled people, and we have seen that there are certain, troll houses that keep on running this malicious campaign. They are going to face the music eventually. Then there is the foreign element, the hostile element, people who have been, like India, for example, hybrid warfare and the 5th generation warfare that is also employed. There are a lot of accounts. You cannot account them. Where exactly are they coming from? They are not from within Pakistan. But there is a third element also, our diaspora. Our diaspora was angered by removal of Imran Khan Sahab to a great extent, and there was a reason why. Remember that Imran Khan Sahab is a charismatic leader, and he has also spoken about Islamophobia, something that actually they faced right in the West. So they are clinging to the hope that he will come back. But they all need to be informed that this is not the way forward, right? If you want to actually do something, win over arguments rather than insulting our institutions. This is very important. So we need to have a conversation, and I hope in coming days we do have that. But for once, I'm really happy that after DG ISBR's press briefing, we have seen air slightly clearing, and people have stopped using that kind of obnoxious rhetoric that was there.
And perhaps, Farrukh, there's a fourth element as well, the naive youth that we have, the very, very young population that perhaps may be voting for the first time in the country or haven't even reached that age.
Yeah,
it's
just to point out
Sure.
one very humble thing. You know, the parts of brain that are meant for decision making don't mature and develop till the age of 25. So if there are people between 18 to 25, they will need more persuasion than anybody else, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they are enemies. They are our own people. We can convince them.
Absolutely. Brigadier Sahab, earlier we were talking about the Judicial Commission, and I want to also understand whether or not it's going to have an impact to the popularity of PTI as well. Would they want to actually hope for a Judicial Commission being formed so that they can keep the issue of this letter or conspiracy alive? Because of course their own narrative depends on them. So a complete backing away may not be the best option that the PTI has, and perhaps what they want to be able to do is keep this issue alive as long as possible. Would you think the Judicial Commission would help resolve the matter or would help PTI elongate it?
I think Judicial Commission, if it is constituted, and if a need is felt, it would lay to rest all those conspiracy theories that were peddled, and the mendacity in the whole thing for petty political gains would be very evident. But before we do that, the DG ISBR's very clear, pronouncement that this was a routine internal communication, and in which no conspiracy aspect has been identified, and neither was it articulated in the minutes as such. Now, the Troll Brigade is just latching on to the meddling aspect, and they are ridiculing and creating a kind of a campaign. So we go to the bigger idea of what came to pass, that such troll brigades have been let loose. A whole generation has been groomed in a manner to peddle lies and hatred. I think this is the bigger issue which needs to be addressed, and the whole grooming process on the social media, guidelines, the ethics, and possibly the retributive actions by the state to instill some kind of responsible social media journalism. This is also the need of the hour.
Right. Brigadier Sahab, earlier something very interesting happened. DG ISBR also pointed to the government's pledge of holding the meeting of Parliamentary Committee on National Security, that it can be briefed by all the services chiefs and relevant officers, including the said ambassador. But here's the problem. PTI, the main litigant in the case, has already stepped down from the assembly. So now what becomes of that presentation? One thing. Second thing, when PTI is now asking for a judicial commission, but we know when it was in power, it was not forming a judicial commission. It was, forming another commission led by a retired journal. So how do you think that computes?
Judicial Commission should be headed by a serving judge and not a retired general. I think the demand for a judicial commission was a political ploy and posturing by the previous government. I don't think so. They were seriously evaluating it. They knew time is not on their side, and they are on their way out, and they just wanted to gain some political mileage out of such statements, which is a very naive way of getting the political mileage at the cost of some serious national security issues. Two things we should never politicize: national security policy and your foreign policy. These are far too serious and matters to be treated with the requisite circumspection and gravitas. And unfortunately, these were politicized, and which doesn't bode well for
absolutely, and that is the unfortunate part as well that I want to talk to Mr. Javed as well with regards to this involvement of foreign elements. This is something that has been unfortunately shared a lot in the past by previous governments as well, where when they're in trouble, a reference is made to foreign elements being involved, and that has been the case on so many instances. But we also understand that there has been serious foreign involvement from the likes of India as well. And so these falsehoods and the truths, when they actually, these lines are blurred, it means that we don't really have a complete picture for the public to be able to understand what's really going on, and then we don't really even act responsibly enough for that. How can new governments or proceeding forward, Pakistan look forward to actually eliminating this issue from our politics?
Well, I think it should be quite obvious that in view of the enduring threat posed by India to Pakistan's security, whenever there is some internal difficult situation in Pakistan, India will try to exploit it for its own nefarious designs. So we have to be very, very careful that when such issues take place in Pakistan, that the government and the journalists and the media and political parties should be alert, and they should not allow their views to be blurred and to be distorted by disinformation campaigns launched by elements working for Indian propaganda machine. So this is very important that this effort should be sustained, because such events will keep on occurring, and it will be India's constant effort to widen fault lines, political fault lines, or social fault lines, or religious fault lines in Pakistan for creating instability in Pakistan. And we should be very sensitive to that, very alert to those efforts by India.
Exactly, sir.
Exactly, this is what the Pakistan government and Pakistan authorities now should be doing, is to expose.
Brigadier Junjua, sir, I just wanted to ask about, we had a statement from DG ISBR which categorically says no martial laws in future. How important is that statement coming out at this time for obviously for the democracy in Pakistan and for sustainable democracy in Pakistan? Number one. Number two, looking at the current political scenario, when should we be expecting the next election, sir?
Answer to your first question, yes, this was a very important statement, and considering our legacy issues with our civil-military relations, which have been checkered in the past, this was a categorical statement that lays to rest the ghosts of all past interventions and meddling by army into the politics. And this is in sync with Rebecca Sheff's theory of concordance, wherein there is a complete concordance between the political elite, the armed forces, and the people. And each institution works within the ambit of its constitutional limits. And I think from that angle, it was a very, very important statement. And this should give a lot of heart to all constitutionalists and Democrats in the country. Answer to your next question, when should the new elections be? Well, this should be left to the people's representatives. We have a parliament, has been a constitutional process, and as the constitutional process develops further, it should be on the basis of consensus achieved in the parliament, and there's a need of a national dialogue also. And if the opposition
and that's a very good point, Brigadier Saab. With your permission, let me go back to Ambassador Javed Hussain. Ambassador Saab, earlier we were talking about populism and this untapped potential of anti-Americanism and xenophobia in this country. If PTI were not to actually exploit it, we know that somebody else would have. For example, TLP exploited the sentiment against France. Sir, as a career diplomat who has been in service for quite some time, do you think that Foreign Office can work with the people to educate them more about other countries, other nations, so that this hatred and this fear of the other actually goes down? Because America as it stands is not only the largest market of our products, but America is also a country which recently has donated a lot of vaccines to Pakistan as well. So there are complementaries which can be actually focused on, sir.
Well, first of all, we have to understand that our relations with countries of the world have several dimensions. Even with the friendly governments, we can sometimes have differences on different points of view on important international issues. That is normal, and that is why you have embassies, ambassadors, and diplomatic exchanges between countries to understand each other's point of view with a view to evolving some kind of mutually agreed solution. Now, having said that, we have to be very, very careful. The government, the Foreign Office can play a positive role, but Foreign Office is not best suited for such debates. I think this is something that political parties, our media should play an active role to ensure that our people understand the nature of international politics. They are sensitive to foreign conspiracies in the form of disinformation campaigns, which are, for instance, launched by India against us. And they try to understand the realities of the situation. Here, the government can play a role, political parties can play a responsible role, and also the media itself. And Foreign Office, of course, can provide and feed information, but Foreign Office, my feeling would be, should not be at the forefront for waging these, media for propaganda purposes. I think Foreign Office should remain at the background for providing very well-considered information to our Ministry of Information, to our political parties when needed, to Parliament, to the government, and then it should be left to them to educate the people through debate and discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Javed Hussain and Brigadier Rashid Wali-Janjua, for joining us and being a part of the debate and talking to us with regards to the government and, of course, the evolving situation and our relationship with the United States. We'll also now be taking a look at the situation in Al-Aqsa Mosque and the raids that have been conducted earlier today by the Israeli occupation forces and the people who continue to suffer still. We know that more than 150 Palestinians have been injured and about 400 detained from Al-Aqsa Mosque as well, and this is something that we've seen previously as well. Faisal, when we look at the situation with regards to the suffering of Palestinians and the way that these raids continue to happen, it's not something new. It happened last Ramzan as well, and this time around as well we've seen this happen earlier today when a lot of worshippers were gathered at the mosque. How is this something that is okay for the international community to respond to? There is no consequence, of course, for such a long time. Again, we've seen that there is perhaps not even real condemnations that we see coming out. And a lot of the shift, of course, has been elsewhere and not on the issue of Palestine. And whenever we see even such videos circulating, which perhaps seem to beg attention, it still doesn't come. Why is that?
Exactly, Sana. It is highly unfortunate, and this happens every year, every time, especially in Ramadan as well, because we know the influx of the worshippers. It increases during Ramadan, and right now, of course, what has happened today is 152 people. They've been injured in these clashes, and it is. I mean, the point is. Right now, attracting Jewish worshippers, attracting Muslim worshippers, attracting Christians as well, because we know that it's the Easter time as well. So right now, when worshippers are there, and a large number of police getting in and starting to shooting around people, it does not make sense. And I think the world leaders, they should take a note of it and they should condemn it. Unless they do it, it won't stop, and it must stop here right now, because we know that if these kind of incidents, if they are not given importance, then of course people take to streets, and it becomes a chaotic situation in Jerusalem. And I think Jerusalem being very important for all Abrahamic religions, especially in Ramadan, it needs to be looked after.
Right, and that's a lot of shoulds and musts and what needs to be done. But at the end of the day, it's not happening, and it's not happening for a long time. And conflicts like Palestine seem to not have the sort of urgency anymore that the world requires for them to be able to take action. How do we actually bring that about? Because perhaps human suffering in itself is not really an urgent matter, Farrukh.
Right, Sana, frankly, when you talk about Palestinian people, they have become invisible, to be honest. And I tell you one of the reasons why. Donald Trump's presidency is thought to be one of the best things that could happen to a lot of parts of the world, particularly to the great powers and their freedom to act whatever they wanted to do. But there were two places where it actually backfired or really repressed. One, their own country, America, and the second one is Palestine, because the Arabs came close to Israelis, and there was this Abrahamic Accords as well. Because of that, a lot of focus went away from the Palestinian plight. If you remember that event when America decided to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, there was this great event where they had split screen. On one side, they were celebrating and cheering. On the other side, you saw that people were being killed and massacred before your eyes. Right? At this moment, we have to be grateful to a few elements, particularly, for example, Al Jazeera, that reports from ground and that documents everything that is happening. And because they have an English channel, they can reach out to the Western world as well. But having said that, this time the situation worsened because of two elements. One, the coincidence that within Ramzan there was Passover and then Easter holidays as well, the Christian and Jewish holidays as well. And then of course there are elements within Israel or Israeli community who actually exploit, hardliners, who exploit such situations so that there is violence and they get strength in the elections and in power. So that happened once again. Unfortunately, 300 Palestinians were actually arrested, 150 were injured because of this action, and that too in Ramzan. This must stop, as was pointed out by Faisal, but the only way to do it is to agitate about it and to actually showcase what exactly is happening, which Al Jazeera is doing, and thankfully because of that. Remember when there was war in Gaza, at that time also they demolished an entire building through a missile. And it was because of Al Jazeera that the Western press had to actually take stock of the matter. So that is, in a way, there is some silver lining, but it is bad news.
Absolutely, and another aspect that also came about then was the social media campaign as well, and there were a lot of stories that were being shared, and a lot of people were talking about it, and perhaps for that certain amount of time, this seemed to be an issue that was being discussed. But Faisal, that also changed pretty soon, and I understand, of course, that there's so many other developments happening in the world as well, and perhaps this fluctuation keep on existing. We had the Ukrainian crisis and other issues which took the forefront. But then again, the issue, other issues also still remain at the same time over there. When we look at, for example, the social media campaigns, how do we make sure that these issues are kept alive on such platforms? Because a lot of the people, of course, are present in terms of our social media presence as well, and their opinions do matter.
Sana, what happens is, we very well know that in West there are volunteers, and there are volunteer organizations as well who are around the clock. They are propagating and highlighting the voices of Palestine, the voices of Gaza, and that really matters. And they don't do it occasionally; they constantly do it, and it is taking place. And majority of the people they have working for them, they are volunteers from Western countries and volunteers from America and Latin America and elsewhere. But earlier Farrukh highlighted a very important point of obviously President Donald Trump, the former president. In his tenure, we know that lots of planes were moving around. Some were going to Riyadh, some were going to Dubai or Abu Dhabi or wherever they were going. Jared Kushner was moving around, and there was a quest going on of course getting recognized, Israel recognized, and that would have helped move things. To him, it was the policy was that if Israel is recognized, then there will be a solution coming up. But of course, declaring Jerusalem as a capital or de facto capital or whatever, I think it would never be accepted to Muslims or Christians as well. So this was the problem. And now, if we look at the social media is working round the clock, especially when it has happened there. Majority of the footages which are coming out from there, they are volunteers making footages and even sending to the TV stations as well. About Palestine and about Gaza, of course, they have a youth, a social media user youth. They know where to send the videos. They know what kind of videos they need to make and send it where.
All right.
And they keep on doing that.
Okay. Let me also welcome in the debate Mr. Sami Hamdi, who's a Palestinian journalist. He's joined us online. Thank you very much, Mr. Sami, for being with us. We're discussing what has happened earlier today in the Al-Aqsa mosque, and of course, so many Palestinians have suffered. But before we talk more on that, there have been a lot of numbers that have been shared, and we still don't have accurate information as to what is going on the ground. Can you help us understand what really is happening at the moment, and what are the real numbers?
So this year, first of all, thank you for having me. This year, Ramadan and the Passover, the Jewish festival of Passover, come at the same time, in the same time of the year. So some of the Orthodox Jews, or particularly some of the far-right Jews, are insisting on performing their sacrifices within the holy area of the Aqsa Mosque, within the haram of the Aqsa Mosque, which includes the mosque and some of the surrounding area. But part of implementing these sacrifices is also an intention to provoke the Muslim population and to increase this assertion on the part of some of the far-right Jews that Jerusalem belongs to them, that Al-Aqsa should be demolished and that it should be replaced with a Jewish temple or the Temple of Solomon. So this was part of using a religious event in order to try to provoke some of the Muslim worshippers. When the Muslim worshippers resisted and essentially responded to this provocation on the part of some of these Orthodox or far-right members of the population, of the Jewish population, we saw that Israeli forces or the occupation forces stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and essentially tried to intimidate the Muslim worshippers and essentially embark on an action in which to try to assert the dominance of the occupier over the occupied. And this is what resulted in those scenes that we saw in the video of tear gas, of Muslim worshippers being beaten while they were praying in the mosque. As a result, hundreds are wounded. And this is also what we saw outside the perimeter of the Al-Aqsa Mosque when other Palestinians were provoked. There were attempts to prevent them from attending the Friday prayer, the Jumu'ah, which resulted in even more provocations. And although the Friday prayer was subsequently held, there is a very tense environment in which the government has been rather silent. The apartheid government in Tel Aviv has been rather silent on what is happening. We're seeing these provocations take place, but it's important to stress that there are now diplomatic efforts on the part of the UN and the like in order to try to prevent an escalation similar to that which we saw last year, in which events such as the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque resulted in an all-out conflict between Gaza and between the occupation forces in Palestine.
Right. And
so
Sami, as you've said rightly, this has happened in the past as well, and it's happened last year as well. And I understand what you're talking about with reference to the Passover and Ramadan also coinciding. But again, this was something that we already knew. This was something that perhaps for which measures could have been taken previously as well. If the UN is intervening now, perhaps it could have been done previously as well. But of course, there are different religious sentiments involved, and we talk about religious freedom for everyone to be able to practice their faith freely. Surely there could have been more stringent measures taken to allow people to do just that.
And can you confirm the numbers of the injured?
I think it's important to put this into context, in that the regime in Tel Aviv has been essentially implementing these measures and using religious festivals and using the law, between quotation marks, to try to force the Palestinians to leave the area of Jerusalem themselves. They've been giving out orders to demolish homes, to rebuild Silwan, to rebuild Sheikh Jarrah, to kick out the Palestinians, to try to make life unbearable for the Palestinians, because they want to go to the UN to say to the UN, we didn't push them out, they left by themselves. This is all about intimidating the Palestinians in the area so that they willingly move out of that area, so that the regime can occupy Jerusalem and claim that it was not them who kicked out the Palestinians, that the Palestinians left themselves. And this is why the issues about measures being taken place to respect religious freedoms, this is why they weren't taken, because for the regime in Tel Aviv, for the apartheid regime, it's not about religious freedoms, it's about trying to make life unbearable for the Palestinians, because the international attention doesn't allow them to openly go and force them out in the way they've done with other areas as a result of the sensitivity of Jerusalem. So what they're trying to do is to make life unbearable, to wrap them up in legal issues, to demolish some homes on the basis of it being built inappropriately, to allow religious festivals in a manner that provokes the Muslim worshippers, in the hope, the apartheid regime hopes, that the Palestinians will say Jerusalem is not worth it, let's go and move to Jordan, or go move to the West Bank, or go move to Gaza.
Right.
This is why these measures weren't taking place. The regime in Tel Aviv wants the Palestinians to be so
right.
fed up.
And Sami, it's almost ironic that you say that it's because of the international attention that they have to draw a certain line, because everything else that's happening seems to be happening with a complete disregard to the international community actually looking at it, or perhaps their silence that continues to exist. I understand the narrative that you're trying to explain that is being presented and what is being used for, but at the end of the day, we also need to be able to come up with something to counter that. What can that be, and how can we put forward the issue of the Palestinians further, where there can actually be some action taken and not just words and condemnations?
I think first and foremost, it's important to stress that this is an apartheid occupation of a land that does not belong to the occupiers, and that previously, before the occupation, Jews and Muslims were living side by side until, of course, the Zionist occupation decided to kick out the Palestinian population. What's important to highlight is that the narrative has shifted. The narrative has shifted since the war last year, in which, as a result of social media, one of the panelists explained the impact of social media, in which Palestinians have essentially released those videos and are communicating with the world directly, which has shifted the narrative. And this is why we see that the Israelis are trying to use a religious festival to try to push the Palestinians out, as opposed to the traditional methods of the past few decades, in which we saw outright trying to oust them in front of the public eye. This is why we see Israel now trying to use some sort of justification for it, as opposed to just willy-nilly doing it in the manner that they did before. And that's because there is a change in this narrative, because words such as apartheid are being used in Congress, they're being used by human rights organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, and this is why it's about the Muslim community.
Right,
the Ummah,
absolutely. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Sami Hamdi, a Palestinian journalist, for joining us and talking to us at length about what has happened today, and of course with regards to the larger issue of the suffering of the people of Palestine that has been continuing for a very, very long time. And indeed, we keep calling out the international community to be able to listen to the people and relieve them of their suffering. But again, we haven't really seen any real consequence, and we can only hope that it changes soon. Thank you very much for watching Debate. We'll see you Monday.